When we sit down, it's time for the conversation, and no show brings you this kind of perspective, a Pan-African perspective on coronavirus, more of a panoramic view of the state of COVID-19 in Africa. How are the numbers in these countries? How are they managing their cases? How are they tracking? What are the economic implications? And what are the possible economic recovery mechanisms that respective governments will be exploring beyond COVID-19? Our guests for today, we want to introduce them so that you can meet them. Peter Serena joins us live from Ghana. He is the head of news at IMAX Television, which he heads news there. And then he's also the former head of production at Contramed Limited. He's the former news editor at Metro TV. He's a former news correspondent for Genoa News Agency Accra Bureau, and he holds a Bachelor of Arts, English and Literature from University of Cape Coast. Our second guest, Tebogo Shwane, she's a business news reporter with the MoneyWeb, South Africa. She is a business reporter formerly with Mail and Guardian. She was a news intern at Eyewitness News. Tebogo has interest in public policy and labor, and she equally holds a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and Media Studies from the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. Our third guest coming to you live from Uganda is Connery Megumi. He's an investigative journalist with NBS Uganda. He specializes on current affairs, dysfunctions of the economy, and social matters. He hosts an extended broadcast on coronavirus that airs daily on NBS. He also doubles up as a columnist at Nile Post, and the title of his column is My Parting Shot. He holds a Bachelor of Information Technology, and he is a Leo Africa Young Emerging Leader Program Fellow. Also interesting to know that he held an interview with President Museveni that caused a buzz online because the president insinuated that he will be pushing the elections to 2021, or rather might. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for making time.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Ghana. Serena, we understand that the president of Ghana opted for 14-day self-isolation, and we've also seen the numbers have kind of been rising in Ghana. Kindly bring us up to speed. How are you tracking in terms of COVID-19 numbers?
Okay, thank you very much for having me. And from Ghana, prognosis is not great. At the beginning of this crisis, Ghana was being touted by the United Nations as the country that was leading. But within the last few weeks, since the easing of the lockdown, the figures have skyrocketed. We are gunning up to 30,000 cases, nearly 200 deaths. And in spite of the fact that the recovery rates are so high, people are raising concerns in this country about the manner in which we are progressing. The issue being that the easing of restrictions has led to the opening of universities for final year students, the same for colleges of education, senior high schools, and the junior high schools. We have about 2 million students of all categories going to school on a daily basis. Now, 37 schools in Ghana have recorded cases of coronavirus since the reopening, and parents of those kids, the teacher unions and whatnot, are up in arms against government. The government is still adamant that, look, this is the way to go, because if we don't educate the children, we're going to have an educational crisis, much to the displeasure of parents and a lot of Ghanaians.
Thank you, Serena, for those insights. Let's now go down to South Africa. Tebogo, if you can hear me, we want to talk about the rising cases, and the numbers have risen very drastically. Currently, South Africa has over 280,000 cases. Bring us up to speed with what's going on down south, and why are we seeing a spike in numbers?
As of Tuesday, the country had just under 300 confirmed cases of COVID-19, where half of these cases were active cases. We've also seen great recoveries. Around 146,000 people have recovered. The death rate at the moment is quite low. 4,600 people have died. And the numbers, though, are increasing at an exponential rate when you compare it to when we first recorded our first case of COVID-19 in March. Particularly now as the country begins to ease the the hard lockdown restrictions and economic activity as well as the movement of persons is permitted, we're increasingly now starting to see the strain of the virus or the peak of the virus on the healthcare system. The Minister of Health, Zweli Mkhize, has said that, there's been a surge, or there's been a rapid increase rather, in the number of COVID-19 patients that require hospitalization, particularly in metropolitan areas such as your Gauteng and the Western Cape. The government also recently reintroduced an alcohol ban that was lifted in June when the restrictions were eased further. And this is because there's been a noticeable surge in trauma-related cases that are said to be burdening the healthcare facilities that need to be freed up for COVID-19 patients.
Thank you, Tebogo. That's South Africa trying to mitigate the spread of coronavirus after it eased its lockdown. But crossing over to Uganda, Connery, the country has been featured as one of the very few countries that hasn't recorded a single coronavirus death. And the country has also been able to contain the spread of the virus, only 1,000 cases so far. How did the government manage to pull through such a huge task?
Well, to be honest, I cannot tell why there's no single death. It's a blessing, but also there's no scientific proof on what exactly Uganda has done to keep like this with no single death. But on the low number of cases, we can say that at least the country was able to lock down early, and there were really, really strict restrictions. They were so strict that there was no movement at all, apart from the essential workers like the media and health workers. And this lasted for over 3 months. And therefore, the only cases actually we are registering up to date are cases from truck drivers who are transporting cargo from countries like Kenya, South Sudan, and other neighboring countries. So we can say that there are about maybe 5% of community spread infections, because up to date, we've recorded about 1,043 cases, but over 908 recoveries. And it also means that we have about 100 and something cases that are still active. So our hospitals are not clogged with patients and all. And there was like a plan B to say that if the cases rise, people should just go home and be treated from there. But hospitals are still empty because most of the people have recovered from coronavirus. And also, the schools were closed, transport was restricted, there's curfew, and therefore there's less convening of people after 7 p.m. And they can also not go out after, before 6:30 in the morning. So the strict restrictions really, I think, helped in one way or another. But also, it was important that the country locks up early so that they can detect where coronavirus is coming from. And then later we discovered, first, it was the returnees from countries like Dubai, the UK, the United States. And then later, when they shut down the airport, the coronavirus cases, the patients who are from the truck drivers and their contacts. They've also established a great structure of contact tracing that helps to trace contacts of these truck drivers. They've also restricted truck drivers when they come into the country, they cannot mix with other people because they're given food and given where to sleep and then tested first. If you're positive, they take you in. If you're negative, then you're permitted to go into the country.
Staying with you, you've been on lockdown for about 3 months and you're saying it's very strict, so you've been able to keep the numbers low. However, it comes at an impact and it has an effect, like WHO and IMF said. I want to know, how has the lockdown affected the economic prevalence in the country? How has it affected the economic muscle of ordinary Ghanaians and also the Ghanaian economy the Ugandan economy?
Well, we've had a revenue shortfall. We had projected the economy to perform at about 6% in terms of its rise, but then we've had a huge economic revenue shortfall, and it's now being projected to rise at about 2.5% and 3%. That's almost half than what we had projected. But also, most businesses that were shut are slowly opening up, and therefore they have been given a few stimulus packages, not really money given to them, but like easing in the paying of taxes, deferment of tax payment, and other measures that have been put in place. So there's been a huge impact on the people who are doing small businesses because they cannot operate if they have started opening up. They can only operate for a few hours because they now need to pack up their bags early and then go home because transport is limited. So most of them have had to walk. And 7 p.m. curfew time is also around the corner. And then there's so much traffic because everyone is rushing to go home. So they're working small hours. So they have to make sure that they maximize productivity within those small hours. And also the other thing is that the government has had to come in handy and support some of the businesses. For example, they have added the tax body, which is Uganda Revenue Authority, to at least postpone tax payment for about a period of 6 months. Banks have been urged to help businesses and other individuals who have borrowed from them to lower down their interest rates. So in one way or another, it's not the best package, but at least the country has had that shortfall, but it's being supported here and there.
Hey, before we cross over to Ghana, let's go down to South Africa. Tebogo, what kind of impact is coronavirus and the slowdown in the economy and the level 5 lockdown that South Africa previously had on crucial sectors like finance, mining, and tourism? Tebogo?
The finance sector has definitely seen a hit. There was a huge market sell-off by investors, which left very few companies unscathed. Particularly our banks saw their share prices falling by between 30 and 40%. There's been a sharp decline as well in economic activity in the country, with a number of companies either retrenching their workers or cutting salaries, which is obviously then impacting on the demand for credit as well as consumers' ability to honor their loans. Banks have offered payment relief to consumers that have been impacted by the virus. Similarly, insurance companies have done so too. But I think it's also then important to note that, the South African Reserve Bank has said that our financial institutions have built significant liquidity buffers, and these can be used to absorb the stress that has been caused in these extraordinary times. The tourism sector, on the other hand, has really been the hardest hit since the lockdown was in place on March 26. All activities in the sector were stopped, borders were closed, flights that had been scheduled have been suspended, and we're gradually seeing some parts of that sector being allowed to trade on a limited basis. For instance, in June, the government permitted domestic air travel, but only for business purposes. Licensed hotels and B&Bs could take guests, but we're still in a condition where interprovincial travel is not allowed, leisure travel is not permitted, and the country is still largely closed off to international tourists. Restaurants are also being allowed to take in sit-down customers, but they're not seeing the kind of traffic that they were seeing pre-lockdown because of the health, obviously, and security fears from customers, but also due to the economic impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on the ability of consumers to spend on things such as eating out. In the mining sector, as you've asked, has also seen a devastation, or sort of like has also been hard hit by the virus. They only started doing full production in May. Large parts of the mining sector were closed down between March and May before that. And when we look at your April figures, you can see that mining output fell by some 50%. And then the May figures, which reflect a period where full mining operations were now underway, show that output has declined by some 30%. We're starting to see obviously a recovery in that sector, but the impact itself compared to a year ago is definitely grave.
Say Tebogo, the impact is grave, and crossing over to Ghana, the impact is likely to be grave because Serena, 2019 was dubbed as the year of return. It was also the year was there, and there are so many people coming back to Ghana, particularly from Europe, Asia, America, to reconnect with their roots. And it said that Ghana made approximately 1.9 billion USD from the year of return campaign. Now this year, 6 months into COVID-19, statistics show that about 117 billion USD has already been lost as an impact of COVID-19 on the tourism sector. I want to find out from you, what kind of economic trickle-down effect will this have on the local Ghanaian economy and even Ghanaians?
Okay, thank you once again. I think, from my observation, these are not going to be easy for Ghana economically. In fact, the finance minister, Ken Ofori-Atta, will be presenting the mid-year review budgets next week. And I understand at a cabinet meeting last week, he was asked to revise his projections downwards drastically because of the coronavirus. The issue is that, the manufacturing companies that rely on inputs from outside, because of the lockdown, most of them ask their workers to go home. There are small and medium enterprises that have shut down because they can't do anything. And small individuals are affected. People get out, they go to do their business. Oh, there's coronavirus now, you can't work. And so if you look at the hospitality industry, for instance, most of our hotels were filled by foreigners, as you said, from Asia, Europe and the US. Now, those people cannot get into Ghana. As a result, the hotel rooms are empty. They are still running out bills in terms of electricity and so on and so forth. I mean, they can't provide food for anybody because nobody's coming in there. So obviously, it's taking a huge toll. If you go to the beaches, for instance, the beachfront facilities, because of the restrictions, few people go there. And it's just so bad that, because I live close to the beach, I interact with them. And some have told me that they may not be able to recover post C-19 because they are just down and they've got huge holes in their finances.
Serena, we understand that when the Ghanaian budget was drawn, it was anticipated that the price of oil per barrel will be $62.60 US. However, coronavirus happened and the prices of Brent went up to negative, and now give or take the best we're going to get is 40. How does this affect the dynamics of national revenue? Because we have a $50 deficit.
Gap in there. That is, it's maybe like taking, in fact, the $20 deficit might translate into 20% of revenue shortage or more. Because in spite of the fact that Ghana is an oil-producing country, we are still a net importer of finished products. Okay, so that gives us a challenge. I don't know how much of the money, I haven't got the figures, how much of the money we make from oil is used to import finished products. But the bill is huge. And with a $20 shortfall in oil prices, it's going to leave a huge gap in government revenue mobilization. The exporters and all those people that are related somehow or other to the upstream and downstream of oil production are going to be affected. In fact, they are affected terribly because most people just cannot move around and do things. And I believe that this is one of the reasons why the government asked that the figures should be scaled down drastically, because if we relied on oil to give us $60 and it's now going to give us something like $40, which could even be worse anyway, by the close of the year, we don't know, then it just leaves a whole gap. I don't know what kind of growth figures the finance minister will project next week, but it's going to be a far cry.
I want to find out if they have to scale down the budget, then it means that there are sectors that will see the big chop in terms of finances. What are some of the sectors that are likely to be affected? Very briefly.
Education and health consume a huge chunk of Ghana's budgetary allocations. Okay, and let me just cite this example. Government gave clearance for nurses and other health professionals to be recruited about 3 months ago. As of today, not a single one has been recruited. And I can guess that it's because the finances are not there to recruit and to pay them.
So health is one of the sectors that will obviously be affected. Let's cross over now to Uganda. Connery, the effects of coronavirus are inevitable and they are undeniable. For example, a sector like agriculture that contributes largely to the Ugandan GDP has been affected by COVID-19. I'd like you to talk to us about how the disruption has happened in that sector and with regards to proceeds, imports and exports.
Well, of course, we've had a problem with the exports, because then people are not able to produce as they used to. Factories are some of those things that were kept open, but then there was a problem of transport. So people who work in factories could not be transported easily. The president had urged that whoever wants to operate a factory should go on and have to accommodate the workers, but that was sort of abrupt. Not many factories could manage that. So there was sort of a problem there, and it related to the reduction on the exports. But also, agriculture has not been widely affected because people are still farming. We had anticipated that around June, July, or even May, it would be so hot and would experience a dry season, but it's been actually wet. So people have been farming and going on. But also, because of the lockdown, there's been huge demand of food. And therefore, the sale of food and other agricultural products within the country alone has been able to proceed without not much resistance, apart from transporting the food products from the villages, this is the rural areas where they're grown mostly, to the towns. But also, we've had challenges in our chief exports, like coffee, like tea, like cotton, because of the closure of the border. We've only been exporting essential items, so it's been affected widely. It comes to agriculture, but then with slowly opening up, people have been able now to move and go to the rural areas and do what they have to do. But also, public and private transport has been eased, and therefore, people who work in factories are able to move from work to home.
Likely to see revenue declines from the mishap in terms of exports because products cannot go out. Are we likely to see an impact on the Ugandan revenue?
Absolutely. We've already seen that, actually. We've already seen that. We've lost a huge amount of money already. And as I speak right now, there's been a huge impact, especially people had anticipated that maybe by now would have made the final investment decision on oil and gas, and therefore would be exporting oil already, and it would help in such a period of time. And then because of coronavirus, the companies like Total, already Talo has pulled out, and then companies like Total are still slow on proceeding with what they have to do. They had a tax dispute before. By the time they solved it, COVID-19 had come in play, and therefore the final investment decision delayed in there. So oil has not been really helpful because then it's not yet out of the ground. The other problem is that Uganda's exports have had to decline by about 34.3%. Now, if you know a country like Uganda with low incomes and struggling to survive on agriculture, that's a huge loss because there was, of course, a forecast that it would decline bigger than that. But I think in one or another, we've managed to keep it at about 34.3%.
Cross over to South Africa. Tebogo, we are all talking about the impact on the economy, but what's the trickle-down effect of COVID-19 to the local citizens of South Africa in terms of job losses?
Have a clear picture as to the scale of the disruption that the COVID-19 pandemic and the prolonged lockdown has had on the formal sector. It's been said that we should expect some 7 million job losses in the country. We're also struggling with power cuts at the moment, and this is expected to exacerbate an already challenging economic environment for businesses, in particular small businesses. The latest unemployment figures that we have from Statistics South Africa show that in Q1 of 2020, the official rate rose to 30.1%, increasing by 1 percentage point compared to Q4 of 2019. It's said that Q2's numbers will give us a more clearer picture of how many job losses the country has experienced.
Thank you, Tebogo. We are now aware of the losses both to the economy and to individuals, and we want to wrap up this conversation, but we cannot wrap it up before trying to preempt or discuss the way forward. Let's cross over to Ghana. Serena, what do you think are the probable recovery mechanisms that the government of Nana Akufo-Addo should explore to revive the economy of Ghana post-COVID-19?
Okay. It's a very difficult balancing act for anybody that is trying to, prevent public health, tragedy, and then growing an economy. If you recall, in one of his addresses, he said he knew how to grow the economy, but not how to prevent deaths from C-19. And people are now throwing back his words at him because the numbers are going up. The economy too is slowing down. What is he doing Yes, it's a very difficult thing to say. I can look in the crystal ball, but I think we need to find a way that people should obey the protocols properly. If most of the businesses, if they obey because in some factories, I think one of the factories in Tema had about 500 people getting infected because one person had it and had been in the factory with them for this. So there's just he's giving some stimulus packages to the business communities to waive some taxes, postpone corporate tax for the next 6 months and stuff like that, which are good, but whether that will stimulate growth in the economy and allow business operators to work is a different question.
Okay, now let's cross over to Uganda. Connery, the country has been on lockdown, but you cannot lock down forever. One way or the other, you have to reopen. I want to know, what economic lessons can Uganda pick from the disruption of COVID-19, and what needs to be done when you reopen after a very strict lockdown to set you back on the right economic track?
So I should tell you, after 4 months of lockdown, Ugandans, especially those that work in shops, let's say downtown Kampala in the capital, say they cannot stay in lockdown forever, and therefore they have had to go to street and protest. Police has had battles with them, tear gas fired, bullets, and people arrested. So they're saying we cannot keep closed forever, because if cases are coming from across the border by truck drivers, they say that they should limit truck drivers. But the president, in an interview I had with him, he says that he cannot limit truck drivers from coming into the country because they are importing in essential goods that keep us moving. Now, economic lessons. A group of Ugandans are asking the Social Security Fund of Uganda to give them back part of their money so that they can use it for survival. The other economic lesson that we've learned, and perhaps we need to look into, is that can some businesses be given a stimulus package, a package that can be able to push them at least for the next 6 months or for the next 1 year, because deferment of taxes is not enough.
Connery, thank you very much. Do you have 30 seconds? Let's cross over to South Africa. Tebogo, what needs to be done? Very briefly.
So the government introduced a 500 billion rand economic support package, which is equivalent to 10% of the country's GDP, covering health, social and economic support interventions. Not all of the money was new monies. 130 billion rand was reprioritized from the government's existing budget. 200 billion rand was in the form of a loan guarantee scheme for small businesses administered by the banks. 70 billion was in the form of tax deferments and deductions. The problem has been now in the efficient rollout of the scheme, and that some of the relief that was promised has been scaled back in terms of like certain components of the package. For instance, a new grant was introduced for unemployed people during this period. 50 billion was said to have been available for this grant, but then in the adjustment budget that followed, this was scaled back by some 10 billion rand. Government saying that there was a lack of demand, and this is rather a lack of an uptake of the scheme. And this is not necessarily due to the demand side of the scheme, but more the administrative competency and capacity of the grant agency. By June, they had 600,000 beneficiaries, even though they had received some 6 million applications. And they've said that they've struggled to verify whether or not the people who have applied qualify for the loan. Similar issues are being experienced in the loan guarantee scheme, not necessarily a capacity issue, but rather that there has been a slow uptake. The public numbers that are available show us that only 5% of the 200 billion rand scheme has been taken up by small businesses. And this is because some of the conditions to the scheme have been described as being onerous and too big of a risk for a small business to take up, and especially in the current economic environment that they are operating in. The National Treasury, the South African Reserve Bank, as well as the banks who came together in order to create the scheme, are now discussing ways in which they can amend some of the conditionalities onto the loans in order to encourage a greater uptake on the scheme. These have not been announced as yet. I think it's been over a month now since the scheme was introduced. It was first introduced in May, and you can appreciate that in an economic environment such as this, it is imperative that we are agile in ensuring that we can get money out onto the market as it's needed.
Bogo, very well put. In an economy like this, and not just the South African economy, the Ghanaian economy, Uganda and Kenya, it's important that we inject liquidity in the market to keep businesses going after a strained 6 months. Thank you all for making time. We are very grateful that we got to have this conversation. Tebogo Shwane, business reporter, MoneyWeb South Africa, Connery Megumi, news reporter, news anchor, NBS Uganda, and Peter Serena, head of news at IMAX. Thank you. And I'm hoping that when we finish season 4, we can be able to do another Meet the Press edition where we can look back at COVID-19 maybe 9 months later, if things would have changed or things would have gotten worse. Thank you so much for making time. That's where we leave it. When we come back, my mic is off and your voice is on Social Watch, but still the Continental edition. See you briefly.